I had never planned on settling in a remote village, but life had a way of taking unexpected turns. After losing my job in New York and finding myself with no clear direction and no place to live in next month, I accepted an offer to manage a small inn in the picturesque village of Thornwood. It was a tempting offer, I must say. 3 times I tried negotiating for a higher rate than offered, and 3 times it got approved with no hesitation. Odd. It's like they really wanted me there. Like they really needed my expertise that's not entirely unique, to be perfectly honest. The owner seemed eager for me to work there ASAP, and even offered to pay for my flight. How can a small inn afford to pay me this much, and even pay for my flight going there? They must have really good food, and always out of rooms for the night, I thought to myself. Thornwood is a place nestled deep in the mountains. It was the kind of place that seemed to be trapped in time, beautiful, serene, and isolated. The villagers were warm and welcoming. People there are a bit chatty though. Working the inn was fun as well, but I couldn't help but notice one peculiar tradition they had: the silent feast. It was an annual event held in the village square, and it intrigued me from the moment I arrived. The feast was a grand affair, with tables overflowing with extravagant dishes that would put any 5-star restaurant to shame. But there was one strange rule: no one was allowed to speak or leave until the final dish was served. I asked the villagers about this unusual practice, but they always offered vague answers or changed the subject. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to attend the feast that year, see if it was as interesting as the villagers hyped it to be. The event was held on the first full moon of autumn, and the entire village gathered for it. The air was crisp and filled with the aroma of roasted meats and freshly baked bread. Lanterns illuminated the square, casting an otherworldly glow over the scene. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, but the sheer spectacle of the feast was mesmerizing. As the guests took their seats, the atmosphere was oddly hushed. The villagers communicated with nods and gestures, never uttering a word. I tried to engage in conversation with a few of them, but they simply smiled and pointed to their lips, indicating that speaking was not permitted. The meal began, and the dishes were as incredible as they were diverse. The food was rich and flavorful, and I found myself indulging in the feast more than I had anticipated. Despite the silence, there was a palpable sense of excitement among the diners. I assumed it was due to the anticipation of the final dish. Hours passed and the feast continued. As the night wore on, I noticed something unsettling. The villagers were not eating like usual. Their movements were slow, almost ritualistic. Their eyes flickered nervously toward the village clock tower, which seemed to be ticking louder with each passing minute. I couldn't ignore a growing sense of dread. My curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to investigate why the feast was so deafeningly silent. I could hear all the chewing and food going through their throats. Disgusting. I slipped away from the table and ventured toward the back of the square, where I saw a few villagers sneaking glances around a large, ornate door hidden behind a curtain. My heart raced as I approached the door and pushed it open slightly. What I saw inside made my blood run cold. The room beyond was filled with eerie, flickering candlelight and strange symbols painted on the walls. In the center of the room was an altar covered with an intricate cloth. A large, covered dish sat upon it, and as I peered closer, I saw that the villagers were converging on this altar, their expressions a mix of fear and reverence. Just then, a high-pitched, agonized wail echoed through the room, making me jump. The villagers fell silent, their faces frozen in terror. I realized then that the final dish wasn't just a meal, it was part of a macabre ritual. The wail came from beneath the altar, and I could see the dish trembling as if something was trying to escape from it. Panicked, I stumbled back toward the feast, but as I turned around, I noticed something horrifying. The door to the village square was shut tight, and a crowd of villagers stood in front of it, blocking the exit. I tried to call out, but the rules of the feast held me in place. I could only watch in horror as the villagers' expressions turned to glee, as if the wail had confirmed their darkest fears. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the square, and the ground began to tremble. The villagers remained seated, unmoving, their eyes fixed on the final dish. The wail grew louder, more desperate, until it became an unbearable shriek, and then, as if by some dark magic, the final dish was revealed. Inside the dish was a horrifying sight. A grotesque, living creature writhing and convulsing, its eyes filled with a mixture of terror and pain. The creature looked human, but not exactly. Like it used to be human. The way it curled up into the fetal position while unnaturally shaking its head in pain and wailing creeped me out. The villagers began chanting in unison, their voices rising in a crescendo of eerie harmony. The creature's wails grew weaker until, finally, it fell silent. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to move or speak. The villagers began to eat the final dish, their faces reflecting a twisted satisfaction, face messy with blood like eating a very saucy spaghetti. It was then that I realized the true purpose of the silent feast. It was a sacrificial ritual designed to appease an ancient and malevolent entity that demanded a horrifying tribute. As the feast came to an end, the villagers finally acknowledged me, their eyes gleaming with something sinister. I knew I had to escape, but the villagers were closing in, their intentions clear. I bolted toward the door, fighting through the crowd. My heart pounded as I broke free and ran into the night, the wails of the creature still echoing in my ears. I escaped Thornwood that night, booked a flight without even going back to retrieve my stuff. The airport was a bit far from Thornwood, 1 to 2 hours in car, so I had to walk and run and then walk again just to get out of there. 2 years later in a new town, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was suddenly being watched. At first it was just paranoia, the prickling sensation of unseen eyes on my back, but as the weeks passed, the signs became harder to ignore. It started with small things. I noticed shadows lingering at the edge of my vision, disappearing the moment I turned to look. Then came the strange occurrences, my phone ringing in the middle of the night with no one on the other end. Objects in my apartment subtly moved, and once, a photograph of me at the feast that I never remembered taking appeared on my kitchen counter. The final straw was when I began receiving letters with no return address, each containing 2 words from a language I don't understand. Vorax Umbra. What does that mean? I tried to tell myself it was all in my head, that the villagers couldn't possibly be doing all this. Hoping, no, praying. It's all a sick joke by my landlord. But deep down I knew the truth. They would find me eventually. The most unsettling part was when I started hearing footsteps around my apartment, a steady rhythm that mirrored my own movements. I thought I was going mad until I heard them again, this time in the dead of night, echoing in the hallway outside my bedroom door. I could never catch them in the act. Every time I opened the door, the hallway was empty, yet the presence lingered, a constant reminder that Thornwood wasn't finished with me. They were patient, relentless, taking their sweet time, enjoying the hunt like predators stalking their prey from the tall grass, striking at the moment they deem fit, dictating how much time I have left. What were they waiting for? Before I meet my inevitable end, I got obsessed with details of the weird ritual they call Silent Feast, which I realized is drawing near. It's odd though why it took 2 years for them to come after me. Did they run out of sacrifices for this year's feast? Do they stalk their sacrifices like livestock? I feel like there's an invisible tag hanging around my neck, just like a cow marked for slaughter. Never in my life I got this obsessed with something. It's as if I'm compelled to unravel every sinister detail, as though knowing more will somehow change my fate. I guess this is how people who are marked for death. Here are the notes I've pieced together from old books, decade-old newspapers, and a former Thornwood resident who escaped after watching someone he loved turn into the final dish. He claimed this happened 30 years ago, but it still horrifies him. I found him on a subreddit talking about Thornwood, but people just assumed he's crazy. There's this line that stuck out to me throughout the interview. I wish I asked her to run away with me sooner. I wish I hadn't waited how she'll look after being transformed. Every creature had their own unique metamorphosis. I was young and naive back then, you see. Curiosity is a certified killer. I mean, WTF, right? Safe to say that he was a very disturbed person back then. I guess Thornwood's Silent Feast does that to you. Nonetheless, he gave me vital information that might help appease my obsession. Origin of the creature. The creature is a product of ancient dark magic, rooted in the village's history. Centuries ago, Thornwood was founded on a cursed land, and the villagers' ancestors made a pact with an otherworldly entity called Vorax Umbra by their ancestors before them, to ensure the prosperity and protection of their home. The entity's name, if translated to modern English, comes out to the Devourer, a fitting name. It demanded a yearly sacrifice to maintain its favor and keep the village safe from supernatural threats. To fulfill this pact, the villagers devised a ritual to create a creature that embodies their most profound fears and suffering. The ritual involves capturing an individual, often an outsider, or a resident deemed unworthy, and subjecting them to a process of dark transformation. The transformation process. 1. Sacrificial ritual. On the night of the Silent Feast, a chosen victim is taken to a hidden chamber beneath the village. Here they are bound and subjected to a series of dark, occult ceremonies designed to channel their life force into a physical form. 2. Summoning and binding. The villagers use ancient incantations and symbols to summon the dark energies of the Devourer. These energies are channeled into the victim, causing their flesh to twist and contort in unnatural ways. The ritual bonds the victim's suffering and essence into a single grotesque form that will become the creature. 3. Transformation. The process of transformation involves both physical and spiritual alterations. The victim's body is reshaped into the nightmarish entity seen at the feast, a being that embodies both their torment and the dark power of the Devourer. This creature is then placed into the final dish as a horrifying spectacle of the village's devotion. 4. The final dish. During the feast, the creature is revealed as the final dish, symbolizing the culmination of the ritual and the appeasement of the Devourer. Eating the creature is both an act of homage and a means to ensure the continued favor of the entity. The existence of the creature is thus a direct result of this ancient and malevolent ritual. It serves as a reminder of the village's pact and the dark forces that sustain their existence. The creature's writhing and convulsing are manifestations of the victim's last moments of suffering, forever trapped in a twisted form designed to fulfill the ritual's demands. Why villagers must stay silent at the feast. 1. Preventing the awakening of the creature, the grotesque creature, formed from the sacrificial victim, is kept in a dormant state by the silence of the feast. Any noise or disturbance could trigger its awakening or agitation. The creature's presence is tied to the dark ritual, and noise might disrupt its magical bindings or bring it to life prematurely. 2. Maintaining the ritual's integrity. Silence is crucial to maintaining the integrity of the ritual that appeases the devourer. The ritual relies on an atmosphere of absolute calm and reverence. Noise could disrupt the mystical energies involved and nullify the effectiveness of the offering, thereby breaking the bond between the villagers and the devourer. 3. Preventing the spread of the dark power. The feast serves as a form of dark communion between the villagers and the devourer. If the villagers were to speak, it might spread or amplify the dark power inherent in the ritual. Silence helps contain this power and ensures it remains focused on the creature, rather than dispersing and potentially causing harm or inviting unwanted supernatural entities. 4. Ensuring the creature's concealment. The grotesque creature is a source of immense fear and revulsion. By enforcing silence, the villagers prevent the creation from being fully revealed or scrutinized. The silence acts as a form of psychological control, keeping the true nature of the creature hidden from the feast-goers and ensuring that no one can speak about or describe it. 5. Enforcing a psychological bond. The requirement for silence creates a psychological atmosphere of tension and dread. It forces the attendees to focus on the feast and the ritual, rather than questioning or disrupting it. This silence reinforces the villagers' submission to the tradition and their role in maintaining the pact with the devourer. 6. Ensuring ritual compliance. Silence during the feast ensures that everyone complies with the ritual's requirements. It prevents any dissent or disobedience that might arise if people were allowed to talk or express their doubts. The fear of punishment for breaking silence, disappearance, acts as a powerful deterrent, ensuring that everyone remains compliant and adheres to the ritual. How eating the creature appeases the devourer. 1. Symbolic consumption of suffering. The ritual of consuming the grotesque creature is not merely about satisfying a physical hunger, but is deeply symbolic. The creature, formed from the torment and agony of the sacrificial victim, represents the culmination of suffering and fear. By eating it, the villagers symbolically consume the essence of the suffering, acknowledging their debt to the devourer, and demonstrating their willingness to endure and perpetuate the act. 2. Transference of power. The devourer is a being that feeds on the life force and suffering of others. The grotesque creature is imbued with dark energies and the essence of the victim's agony. By consuming the creature, the villagers transfer this accumulated power back to the devourer. This act of consumption is seen as a direct offering of energy and sustenance, satisfying the entity's hunger for despair and ensuring its continued favor. 3. Fulfillment of the pact. The original pact made with the devourer required a ritualistic sacrifice to maintain the village's prosperity and protection. Eating the grotesque creature is the final act in this ritual, completing the ceremonial cycle. It is believed that by consuming the creature, the villagers are honoring their agreement and thereby securing their safety and fortune for another year. The act of eating is seen as an act of submission and devotion, reinforcing their ongoing commitment to the entity. 4. Mystical bonding. The grotesque creature is not merely a physical manifestation, but also a vessel for dark, mystical forces. Eating it is believed to create a metaphysical bond between the villagers and the devourer. This bond is thought to strengthen the entity's connection to the village, ensuring that it remains influential and protective. The ritual consumption acts as a form of communion with the devourer, reinforcing the mystical link that ties the village to the dark forces it serves. 5. Release of the victim's essence. The victim's essence, trapped and twisted into the creature's form, is released when consumed. This release is believed to satisfy the devourer's demand for the victim's soul and suffering. The act of eating is seen as a way to giving closure to the victim's torment, allowing their essence to pass into the devourer, and thereby completing the sacrificial cycle. Edit. This will be the last thing I'll write, I'm afraid. My insomnia has ultimately consumed me. I had no sleep for 3 straight days now. I could feel my end drawing near. This suffering will be the end of me. Is this how Vorax Umbra prepares tributes? I'm the meat, my suffering, the marinade, and his followers, his patrons. Thornwood is real, people. They'll probably try to change the name, hide the truth, but I won't let them take me without a fight. I'll make sure the world knows what's lurking in that cursed town. I won't go quietly. They think they can silence me like the others? They'll have to drag me kicking and screaming, and I'll make sure everyone hears. Beware of the silent feast.